Hello to you, Marcia, and to your audience, the members of the loyal opposition, and to all of those Barbadians and persons who are joining this program. I listened to your introduction, and I suspect we might have persons who have joined given the issues that you're looking at this evening. And I presume you may have some of our brothers and sisters in Dominica as well among that group of people. Now, as I read and heard you read the comments of Prime Minister Gaston Brown, what I can tell you is that what he has put on the table has been put on the table during the time I was Foreign Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is that there are asymmetries, there are differences, there are different realities facing different member states of CARICOM. People need to understand that as we look to implement the CSM in the CARICOM single market and economy, we have to recognize that there are, in terms of excluding the associate members, there are 14 members, and the Bahamas, you subtract the Bahamas when we talk about the CSME because they are not party to that, and we can explore why later on. But in trying to implement a set of initiatives across those member states with very different realities continues to be problematic. As you would have heard me use the term the idea and the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
We have we, and let me be very clear, I have never opposed free movement. What we have seen over the years, and Antigua and Barbuda went through this, they would have had, as a very small and in relative terms, because when we think of CARICOM, we have small states like Antigua and Barbuda, then we have Belize, Guyana, and Suriname on the, they are not islands. And when you look at the sheer size of those three member states, you understand the differentials. 166 square miles, and some of the islands are smaller than Barbados in terms of land size. So what you have is a situation where the conditions that prevail
Yes.
do not necessarily allow individual member states to agree to what is intended. And that is why, for example, he called for derogation. What a derogation simply is, we want a kind of a suspension of that requirement or that rule or that plan or whatever the case may be. Give us some time to be able to meet what is required, to meet our obligations under whatever it is we are seeking to implement.
Yes.
No, so this is it. So you will hear some countries. In fact, as you were reading that, I was reminded of an article I read yesterday. An economist in Trinidad and Tobago. Her name is Dr. Indira Sajwan. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Sagewan. And she's one of the analysts who have been commenting on the recent decision of the 4 member states.
Yes.
And she said TNT's economy can't support expanded CARICOM migration at this time. That's essentially what she was saying. And she
Oh,
set out
wow.
a set of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Trinidad and Tobago. She said, and this is the country that well, she's now Prime Minister again, once said to heads of state, and I heard her say that Trinidad and Tobago was not going to be the ATM for CARICOM.
Yes.
But the reality for Trinidad and Tobago now is that they are saying, and if you look at the statistics and so on, our economy is not as buoyant as it was before.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, even though Trinidad and Tobago was very attractive to a number of CARICOM nationals, and we know that when we had economic pressures in Guyana, there was a lot of movement of Guyanese, and that's the reality. We are seeing now a lot of movement of Jamaicans across the region.
Yes.
And there are reasons for that. Nobody, and so they're saying according back to the article that I read in the Guardian, it said the rationale from Dr. Sagewan's argument was weak job creation, slow growth, and foreign exchange shortages. And so I would, so in essence, they are saying, look, while we as a country may want to participate, and I think that is what Prime Minister Brown is saying, our circumstances are such that we may be challenged to meet the obligations. Because you see, at the end of the day, it is rights and responsibilities, what we offer and what we get. So there are two sides to the coin, and that is part of the concern that people have. So when we look at this, as I said, there are concerns. An important point that was made here, and yesterday you made reference to the press conference that the DLP had. But I also would want to remind, I think we had a discussion about this on the 28th or so of September when we started to talk about free movement. And if you would recall, one of the questions that I posed was, and I kept talking about the process. But of course, in that situation, I was looking at the process in part because from the perspective of people moving, what happens when they arrive. But so I think part of it is that we have to look at the process, and we also have to look at what I would call the substance of movement when people come. And that is a lot of what the Prime Minister is referencing. The other point that I want to touch on quickly, when he says there has been free movement, the reality is that if you do an analysis of statistics, and this was done when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, I requested and presented to CARICOM trade ministers, as it was a request at the time. Jamaica wanted to have on the agenda of foreign, what we call Quartet Council of Trade and Economic Development meetings. That's meetings of trade ministers. They asked for information on free movement. And it was a general request. My response was, I am very happy, and this is part of what I will share with you, to demonstrate Barbados' situation. I will present immigration statistics. Yes. And when those statistics were presented and you looked at people who were moving under the normal arrangement of, they currently know what it is automatic 6 months, for example. And then you have people who are moving, having acquired skill certificates. And then in the case, like now, people will be moving freely. You have to recognize that people in the region move according to, or for multiple reasons and under multiple categories. And in fact, when you look at the number of persons moving, short term, 6 months and whatever, and oftentimes they would come and then probably find jobs and whatever the case may be, those numbers far exceeded numbers moving under a skills national program, for example, or moving on the rights of establishment being where people came to set up businesses. So Prime Minister Brown is saying that all of these things are happening already. And so at the end of the day, if we add this other category of free movement where no work permits are required, there's no restriction on length of stay, etc., we may have issues of capacity, being able to absorb. Because notice what has happened here. Part of the negotiations, because time has to be spent in negotiations and in negotiating the terms and conditions under which countries will agree to modification of the term, how people move, etc., and agree ultimately to absolute free movement. And so what is critical, we have agreed, for example, as I said, terms that, to the same access to primary and secondary. And I would presume that primary includes nursery, primary, and secondary education. Barbadians have access to that, and anybody moving in the first instance from these three countries will be entitled to the same thing. That is a given. They're also indicated, and we've had discussions on this, so I'm not going to spend a long time and just reminding people.
Yes, because we want to move to the
there's a promise to have access to emergency and primary health care. All right. So those are the things, but that's part of the process. The other part of the process, Marcia, that is critical has to do with what is the standard way by which we participate in these agreements. Okay. And you would have heard yesterday the leader of the opposition and Mr. Grenier speak about legislation. Now, a critical element of the process is to make the decisions of the heads of state or any organ of CARICOM legal. Those decisions have to come into force within the country, within the domestic law, etc. Okay, so heads make a decision, but before it can become effective, the individual member state has to ratify those decisions. And the process of ratification will require almost certainly in a case like this, the passage of legislation to make it legal. Right? And so what happened, or what is required what should have happened, let me put it that way, in relation to Barbados now, we introduced something and says effective October the 1st, this comes into effect. This will happen. But in order to make that legal and binding, the government of Barbados should have gone to Parliament and passed or amended any legislation that touches on matters relating to people being able to move freely and within the confines of the law. So the reality, and let me say this, the lawyers would have spoken to it in detail. The leader of the opposition is a lawyer. The prime minister is a lawyer. The deputy prime minister of Barbados is an attorney as well. The attorney general is a lawyer. Mr. Abrams, who is Minister of Home Affairs and factors in this and acts as Attorney General, is a lawyer. And none of them seem to understand, or if they understand, well, I would give them the benefit of doubt and expect them to understand. And if they understand, which they should, and I am positive they do, they have basically thumbed their noses at Barbadians and Barbados and CARICOM and said, notwithstanding the long-standing requirement, I didn't want to say traditions, long-standing requirements, that any arrangement, any convention, whether it is one between a regional body like CARICOM or a convention emanating at the United Nations, those things have to be put into domestic law first to make them binding. So for example, you would hear that we support something, but it does not come into force until we ratify it. We've had conventions relating to children, to human rights, of all kinds, etc. But until the country says we are satisfied that we can basically meet our obligations and that we have the necessary legal framework in place, it cannot happen. But you know what? In typical, I would have to say, Mia Motley style, as the Prime Minister who's been voted, well, she came at the last minute and spoke to us. But in typical this government style, because I will include her cabinet colleagues and her parliamentary group, they have put the cart before the horse. As I say, they put on the shoes and then put on the socks. Because nothing, and I challenge any of those attorneys that I mentioned, starting with the Prime Minister and her team, because there are several, to tell us that it was okay, or it is okay for a customs official, an immigration official, not even customs, let me take out customs for now. They would probably deal with if people were shipping things once they came here. Immigration official, Barbados Revenue Authority official because the Prime Minister has identified the process of registering that is supposed to happen. I would like them to tell me that those people are legally, or they are legally correct, let me put it, or within the law to go and sign up somebody coming in on a flight tomorrow or who came in on a flight from between the first and now on the or with the expectation that they are moving freely either from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica, or Belize. I have not had a chance to check to see what the other member states have done because they're required to do the same thing. But you know, Marcia, essentially what is problematic is that we are seeking to create opportunities for people in an unlawful manner, in a breaking the law, and and creating some problems. And that to me is indeed problematic. I think that we need, as a country, as citizens, and certainly as people of the Caribbean, an explanation as to why the government has chosen to go down this route. Barbados has long been a law-abiding country, a rules-based country. And in fact, the Prime Minister will go out there in the world and say to the public, I am going to do something very quickly, which is to turn off a fan, because this thing behind me is distracting me. And the curtain
go ahead. Go. Okay. Oh, you turned it off already?
I've done it. So
okay, all right, go right ahead.
So you see, that is a major problem. Now let me just say a couple of things to kind of summarize what I've said so far. Looking at what Prime Minister Brown has said, we have to contextualize these decisions against the background of the realities of the member states. But we also have to recognize that free movement is only as is proposed between the four pioneers, as the countries have been described. They're pioneers. Barbados is a pioneer in there. That beyond that, there is ongoing movement, which means that we have significant numbers of Caribbean people moving across the region. And one of those countries significantly, or let me say two of those countries significantly affected by movement for decades has been Antigua and Barbuda and Barbados. And so that is that. So it is not new. What I believe the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Brown is saying, we have to approach this in an orderly fashion, in a way that it does not disadvantage those who are here. Those are the citizens already in country, and it does not disadvantage persons who seek to come, because you're looking to move to better yourself. That's the reality. You're not going to leave a better situation to go to one that is worse or not as good.
Yeah.
So that is it. The second thing that has to be recognized is that you do not wake up, to use an expression Trinidad, I think it says catch a vaps. You do it by, like, in other words, you just get up and you do it just like that without recognizing that there are, for good reason, ways in which this thing must be done to ensure the legality of it, and that you have the right to do it, and that when persons take advantage of the opportunity, in this case free movement, they are doing so within confines of the laws of the region, of the respective countries. Now, I want to introduce a third thing, Marcia, before you say to me, thumbs up.
Yeah, before Marcia.
Dominica, not St. Vincent, certainly, unless Prime Minister Gonzalez changed his mind since I last heard him speak on it. St. Vincent is not St. Vincent, and the Grenadines is not a part. St. Kitts, Dominica, St. Kitts being the first, Dominica being the second, and other members of the OECS, for example, St. Lucia, Grenada, Antigua, and Barbuda, are countries within CARICOM who have had for many years programs called citizenship by investment. And in the case of Dominica, they have had that program since 1993.
Mm-hmm.
And what I shared yesterday was a situation where when I ceased being foreign minister, I do not, and I subject to correction, I do not recall that we being CARICOM, the heads and ministers, foreign affairs, etc., that a decision had been taken by CARICOM, a definitive position on how those citizens by investment, those people who purchase passports of those countries, would be treated within the context of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which really creates the framework for the articulation, the management, and so on of the CSME. Basically, without getting too technical and getting very basic and down and to the point,
Yes.
Dominica, for example, has a population of about 70,000. Under 75,000 people was the number that I looked at. When I looked at some numbers, I was looking at an article. There's a report prepared by the European Union. And for example, what they quoted were some numbers for these countries. Yes. With a population of 70 something. Dominica in 2000, between 2015 and 2022. I'll give you an example I'll give you St. Kitts first. They were the first to go with this. They were saying that according to this European Union Commission report, between 2015 and 2022, St. Kitts and Nevis issued about 35,577 CBI passports, citizenship by investment passports, right? What they reported for Dominica between 2018 and 2022, the figure reported was 34,596. For Dominica, they went on to, in 2023, the report I was looking at suggested that Dominica issued 9,539. And in 2024, 5,484, totaling about 49,619 for Dominica between 2018 and the first half of 2024. Now, as I said, the population of Dominica was about I looked here, 2023, the figure I had is 74,000. The question you would ask yourself is, what is the significance of that? I have been getting some information which I'm trying to verify based on my research, because I'm trying to be absolutely clear. So let me suppose, rather than be definitive, if we suppose that according to the promises that I've seen in advertisements for this citizenship, a person acquiring a Dominican passport or one from St. Kitts and Nevis as the two oldest programs running within the OECS, that they are entitled to all that CARICOM nationals, in ordinarily identified are entitled. We have a situation where in less than 18 and 2 is 20, in less than 7 years, 6 years, or 5.5, because the statistics I gave you did not extend to the end of 2024, that you have a situation where at least 2/3, I will have to do the calculation. I'm just looking at numbers and trend as I speak to do the calculation. 2/3 of the current stated or suggested population of Dominica would have acquired those passports. So in other words, their population increased on the 10 years by an additional 60% or so, or more. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, when we go back now and add to that all of these people who have acquired these passports, many of them who do not live in the region normally, but are entitled to the rights, but they may decide, okay, I like Dominica. Well, I like Dominica because I was able to get a Dominican passport. I paid for it, but it now entitles me to move around the Caribbean freely, and I like Barbados too. And I may want to locate there, but you know what? I took a moment to look at some of the nationalities
Yes, and
that
then
were
yeah.
cited as people who are attracted to buying these passports: Russia, China, Belarus, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Nigeria, and you can go on and look at it. I mean, I can go and do some
Yes.
in-depth research later. The point I am making is that none of them don't sound very Caribbean to me. The closest to us would be the guys from the people from Nigeria.
Yeah. So in essence, because I want to get Miss Dr. Hines in here, and you made this point, which was so strong yesterday as well, is that under this free movement of people, who's to say that the people who are coming from Dominica are not Russians, Chinese,
Chinese,
Nigerians, people from Belarus? I
Belarusians,
don't know what you call them, and
Belarusians, I think.
not that anything is wrong with those people, but to understand, remember, these would be people who have bought their citizenship, and we don't know all that they are necessarily involved in, and that's the thing. I mean, they're citizens, and
Let's
they could easily come. But I want to get one last point, Miss McLean, for now, just for now, and then let me bring in Dr. Hines. Go ahead.
no. What I was going to say, the reality is that and I will use St. Kitts to finish this point, because most of these people have no intention of living in this part of the world necessarily. They use it for whatever purposes.
Yes.
So in essence, the question is, if they come here, the question would be why. The reality is that they can very well use, now this is the final point I'm making. A lot of countries have been very concerned and have taken pretty negative reactions to some of these initiatives when it comes to things like visas. In other words, it can impact your passport. The Barbadian passport, for example, is considered to be one of those very attractive passports, and that is made so by the fact that we have significant visa waivers. So that,
Yes. Let me get
and
Miss Mary in. Yeah.
and so in essence, what is happening here is that you may find that these persons who have citizenship may decide that they want to move into Barbados. What is to stop a Belarusian who has a Dominican passport coming into Barbados, decide that he or she wants to reside here indefinitely, gets an ID card and all of that, decides then I'm going to stick around and eventually get a Barbadian passport. And then so you start to see, I call it by a process of, for want of a better word, default, they end up with Barbadian passports. And then the people who normally consider our passports to be, so that we benefit from this reputation that we have, it is now affected negatively by an influx of these persons. And the reason I am saying that is, if you go, and I don't have, you will get a chance to discuss the citizenship legislation, because if persons would realize in all the discussions, and I will stop there because
Yes. Yeah.
Dr.
Because
Hines
I want to
agrees
get
with
to
you.
one of the,
In
yes.
all the discussion that we have had on this issue of free movement, the Prime Minister, the Attorney General, the Minister of Home Affairs, none of them have spoken to the planned changes in the citizenship
Yes.